Mr. Speaker, you remind me of a joke in another parliament where someone said that a taxi pulled up outside Parliament.
Was it a Range Rover?
And it was empty.
A Range Rover?
A Range Rover. You've tried your best shot, it's not worked. Mr. Speaker, I want to speak on the resolution providing permission to borrow $32 million, Mr. Speaker. And I want to start off where the member for Castries South East ended. And he was saying that all over the world, people are boasting that St. Lucia is the best place to invest, has the best CIP. St. Lucia is the place where if you want to make money, you have to come to.
It's where the action is.
It's where the action is. And it is true, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of action in St. Lucia. And the honorable member probably knows about all the action that is taking place in St. Lucia. But, Mr. Speaker, the U.S. investigation into the airport development project is probably the best statement of the kind of action that takes place in St. Lucia. And, Mr. Speaker, I have known, Mr. Speaker, that it is not too difficult to get a magazine to write a beautiful story on your company, on a project, or on a destination. It's not too difficult to get on NBC, NBC to do interviews. If you have the right PR people, the right PR agencies, you can get those things published. It's very easy to do it. That's the point. If I am commissioned to write an article for the Miami or the London newspapers, I can write it.
Or pay for one on the airport.
But I'll tell you something.
Or pay for one on the airport.
Or pay for one on the airport? I don't understand what that means, but anyway. The point is, Mr. Speaker, you can get those things done. People are commissioned to do pieces. So what's more important, Mr. Speaker, is for us to look at the figures. Like the leader of opposition, the member of Castries says, the statistics. And Mr. Speaker, the honorable member for Castries South East was recently on a program with Mr. Rick Wayne. And it's interesting what he said.
You watched that?
No, I didn't, but I read the transcript.
Oh, yeah.
He says he don't believe in those figures, in those statistics, because you can make the statistics say anything that you want them to say. That was the member from Castries South East. And today he's talking about 3.7% growth and the growth and how wonderful a story it tells.
He has an MBA, I think.
Yeah, he has an MBA. And Mr. Speaker, he went on to say, and Rick Wayne, Mr. Speaker, is a very astute person. You may have faults with Rick Wayne criticizing, but he's a very astute person. Rick Wayne says to him about GDP, and he says, GDP is just for confidence. It's just to give the world confidence about St. Lucia, so we quote GDP. And he started to quote growth, and Rick Wayne warns him and says to him, man, that means nothing, man, as long as the people in St. Lucia are not better off. He asked him, the honorable member, do you go around on the ground and you hear people complaining? And he says, yes, I do. The people saying they're very frustrated, or words to that effect. I can quote you directly if you want me to. And Rich is warning him.
I don't like some people. I say that.
Well, I think the leader of the opposition, Castries, said it very well. He rather stammer the truth than to lie eloquently. So that is a very powerful statement that the leader of the opposition was referring to. But on that same program, the member of Castries is dismissing the growth. Southeast. Dismissing the growth. Dismissing the references to GDP and growth. And he's saying these are just statistics. Don't bother with them. We only use that to build confidence in St. Lucia. But today in this House, he's boasting about 3.7% growth. And we'll come to this in a while. I heard in this honorable House earlier, Mr. Speaker, that someone on the other side said that Daher Mall was bought by a St. Lucia Labour Party government. Mr. Speaker, we all recall the elections of 2006. There was a sign outside the mall saying, for sale, up to the day before election. And the day or two after election, I think it was 2006, or is it 2011? 2006. The day after election, the sign disappeared. The sign disappeared. It was for sale, United Workers' Party won, and the sign disappeared the next day. Ask anyone who lived north and used to travel that road. And I'm sure I heard in this honorable house an explanation from the member for Mico South, and he can deny it if my recollection is bad. He gave an explanation to this house about the sale of the Black Bay lands, canals, and the Dahe Mall.
Honorable member, just a quick reminder that you of the resolution before.
Yes, I'm building a story on the whole issue of borrowing and credibility.
Come back home.
And credibility, Mr. Speaker. And I'm saying all of that to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that governments need to borrow. This government, when in opposition, told the people of St. Lucia that the Labour Party was borrowing too much, and they pledged to not borrow when in government. This government said it.
Yeah, that's not true.
There will be no borrowing. And then, after a few months in government, the Prime Minister changed it, and he said what he meant was no borrowing without a funding source, a revenue stream. That's his exact words. He started off by saying there will be no borrowing by the United Workers' Party government.
Never said.
And I laughed because I wonder which government can exist and function without borrowing. So this is how the narrative started. We will not borrow. And got into government and realized, how can you run this country without borrowing? And then borrowing started. And then, on the regional market, St. Lucia was able to raise financing. And you know what was said? And the member of Castries said it. There's so much confidence in St. Lucia, we can sell all our bonds. So you move from no borrowing to you have to borrow, to you actually borrowing. And the reason why you can borrow, because there's so much confidence in you. And now, reality is hitting home again. Head a narrative now. There are challenges on the regional market, so we have to go to the local banks.
The first leader of the opposition was much better.
We have to go to the local banks. So you move from no borrowing to I have to borrow, everybody wants my money, to now there's a challenge now, I have to go local. And member for Castries South, none of us benefit if we undermine confidence in the banks in St. Lucia. None of us benefit. And I do not think any member on this side was trying to scaremonger any St. Lucian about any bank in St. Lucia. But you cannot help, Mr. Speaker, but be concerned about not the borrowing, because governments must borrow, but the quantum of borrowing that's involved. The quantum of borrowing.
Now I see why you put now.
And Mr. Speaker, this government will have to account for all the borrowing that has taken place in the last couple of years and what is to come. And there's no scaremongering about it. The $42 million, Mr. Speaker, is necessary for government functioning. We understand that. But in a global context, the amount of borrowing that is taking place in St. Lucia is reason for us to be scared. This government, according to the estimates, last year borrowed about $250 million. During the budget presentation, the Prime Minister announced, Minister of Finance announced, that $150 million US would be borrowed from the Taiwanese government. $100 million for the airport redevelopment, $25 million for roads, and $25 million for schools, if my recollection is right. $150 million US. Mr. Speaker, in the context of borrowing, we have said that we had an arrangement with the World Bank, the IFC, where St. Lucia would not have to borrow any monies. And there was no need for us to borrow $100 million US for the airport redevelopment.
You were giving it away, man. Bad business.
Listen to this. We were borrowing one according to the budget statement. We found out a few weeks, 2 or 3 weeks ago, that the government is also trying to get a loan from local banks again for $75 million US for the airport again. Now, what is the true cost of redeveloping the airport? Is it 100 million? Or is it 175 million US dollars? Tell us. And I heard, and I read actually, on the same reprint program, the member for Castries office announced that on top of the 150 million US, the Prime Minister is such a skillful negotiator, he got the Taiwanese to give us a loan of an extra 50 million US.
Concessionary.
Listen to this. So the loan from Taiwan now is not 150 million US, it's 200 million US. That's over $500 million EC dollars that's not yet accounted for in our debt portfolio. And if the extra 75 million US dollars that is being looked for locally, that will be 275 million US dollars. Almost 750 million EC, $750 million will be borrowed this year. That's not accounted for in the estimates. Think about it. Think about it. This is not scaremongering. This is more than scaremongering, Mr. Speaker. It's the wildest imagination. It's my imagination. Well, either the member from Castries office lied on Rick Wayne's program, or the member from Miku South, Minister of Finance, lied. No, but let's do the maths again, Mr. Speaker. Let's do the maths again. The Prime Minister announced in his budget statement we will borrow 150 million US from the Taiwanese government.
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, the member is imparting or imputing improper motive. I would like him to withdraw the statement
Which one? The statement.
about me lying on Rick Wayne's program.
Make the program a document with the House.
Yes, and they
Bring the tape.
Honorable member for
He said the man was lying on record.
Castries South.
Mr. Speaker, you know that's not what I said.
but we heard you.
Mr. Speaker, the member for Groseley.
Honorable members, please allow the member for Castries South to speak.
Make history, let's listen to the tape.
Go ahead, Honorable member Castries South.
Mr. Speaker,
Member for Castries South.
yeah. So, Mr. Speaker, can I continue my presentation?
Yes,
All right.
just taking into account what the member for Castries South is has said.
So, Mr. Speaker, I mean, I can take the banter, but on a serious note, I said that it's 200 million US, which is 745 million. The member for Grocery said to me, as if that's not true, whatnot. I said, if it's not true, then the member for Castries South is lied on the program, but he's the one who said it. I didn't say that he was lying on the program. That was a banter. We were
I'm not on the floor.
So, Mr. Speaker, so let's do the maths again, Mr. Speaker. Let's do the maths again. The Prime Minister, in his budget statement, announced that we were going to get a loan of 150 million US from the Taiwanese. And we can calculate 150 million US by 2.7.
Mr. Speaker, my point of order still stands. The member was imputing improper motive to me, saying, coming and quote a program and saying that if that is what happened, I lied to the people. I am saying, Mr. Speaker, I know what I said on the program. I'm asking the member to withdraw what he said because I did not lie to anybody. So the member is imputing improper motive.
If that's what you
Honorable members, please allow me to hear the objection being raised by the member for Castries office, please. Are you?
Mr. Speaker, the member said in his statement that if that is the case, I lied to the people on Rick Wayne's program. I am saying in this honorable house, Mr. Speaker, that is unparliamentary language to use towards another member in direct reference. And so I am asking the member to withdraw the statement.
So that's not the same thing as imputing improper motive.
But that is
Parliamentary language is not the same thing.
it is the same,
Fair.
it is both of them.
Honorable
It is
members,
both of them.
honorable members, let's not go down that road. Honorable member for Castries South. Your use of words. Honorable member for Ancillary Canaries. You are not to speak for me, sir. Honorable member for Castries South. The member is indicating that the use of your words to the point indicating if he did not say that he's a liar, is unparliamentary. To call a member a liar is indeed unparliamentary. I'm not saying you did, but I'm saying, watch your words. You may continue, sir.
Good ruling.
Mr. Speaker,
That's a fair ruling.
you notice I kept quiet? Because the last time the member from Castries and I had an exchange, he ended up being thrown out of the chamber. And I certainly want him present here today, so I'm going to keep quiet. I'm not going to say anything, lest I be accused of riling him up.
But read what he said on Requeen, show the exact words.
You want me to read it for you, Honorable Member from Castries office?
You cannot address the honorable.
Let me
Mr.
remind
Speaker,
you also
can I read
that
it for
the
the Honorable Member?
resolution we have is not Requeen Show. So,
Okay,
Honorable
so,
Member,
Mr.
let's
Speaker,
debate the
yeah.
motion before the
So-
House.
Mr.
Wait,
Speaker,
Mr.
I'm
Speaker.
still on my point of order, Mr.
Yes.
Speaker.
It's on a point of order,
So-
Member for Castries.
I want, oh, now you're on the point of order. I want to understand, Mr. Speaker, that the member for Castries South said in his statement that if that is the case, I don't know what case he's talking about, because he was the only one on the floor speaking. He was the only one, and he said, if that is the case, so he was beating his drums and he was dancing, that I lied to the people. Whatever I said on the program was said publicly. I don't know that the subject of the program is a subject of discussion in the House. And I want the member to withdraw the statement that he made concerning
Very,
me
very
in
well, Honorable
relation
Member
to
of
that.
for Castries South. Honorable Member for Castries South. Let me clarify something. You had a side chat with member for Grosley, and as a result of that, you used the words that the member is saying that you should not have used. Okay? So just withdraw that statement off.
No,
no,
Mr. Speaker.
because the record is showing.
Can we-
no.
Go ahead.
The record is just showing that you said if what he said on Requeen should, then he's a liar. Without Honorable Member for Ancillary. Because of the side chat, now I'm not putting in the record the side chat you and member for Grosley had. I'm not getting involved in that. All I'm saying is that the record will show that that part of the conversation was in fact said. I'm not saying you call him a liar. I'm not saying that, sir. That small portion of it was used. The word liar was used. So I'm asking you, yes, it was used. Yes, it was used. So I'm just asking you, sir, that I'm not saying you call him a liar. I'm just saying the word was used. And it gives the impression that you did. But I'm not saying that you did. But go ahead, sir. I would like you to just ask that small portion of it.
Mr. Speaker,
And let's move on.
Mr. Speaker, you're a fair-minded person. And I can tell you I did not use the word liar. And you're saying that I did.
Yes,
I may want to push you, Mr. Speaker, to adjourn this House, if you would so desire, for us to check the records. Mr. Speaker, because I know I did not use the
But
word
you'll
liar.
take it back.
But Mr. Speaker, the last time, the member from Castries office showed how obstinate he could have been when he rejected your ruling and he left the chamber to disrespect all his colleagues in here. Mr. Speaker, if you ask me to stop speaking now, I will stop, because I'll respect the chair, because we're in an honorable chamber.
Mr. Speaker,
And if, Mr. Speaker, you want me to withdraw,
Honorable Member for
why
Castries
can I
South.
speak?
On a
Why
point
can
of
I
order. I
speak?
can speak on a
Honorable-
point of order.
Member for Castries
Standing on
South.
a point of order.
Let's yes,
Point of order
Member for Grosley.
41, standing order 41, Mr. Speaker, you specifically and this directly asked the member of Castries South to withdraw the statement. According to standing order 41, your ruling is not up for appeal. And you are actually being challenged, Mr. Speaker, by the honorable member for Castries South, and that is a breach of the standing orders of this honorable House, Mr. Speaker.
Withdraw the statement from the speaker.
Honorable member for Castries South, I'm still speaking to you.
Okay, Mr. Speaker, tell me exactly what you want me to withdraw. I will say it and exactly how you want me to say it.
Your exchange between yourself and member for Grosley, in that exchange, you did in fact use the words liar.
So take it back.
And if it is found out, Mr. Speaker, I never
I
used
will
the word liar.
apologize to
You will
you if I
apologize
have
to me. Okay, because... Okay, Mr. Speaker, if during the course of my debate I call the honorable member a liar, I withdraw it.
Very
But I
well.
can tell you, Mr. Speaker, if I wanted to use or so characterize him, I would speak about his mendacity, how mendacious he is. I would not use an inelegant word like liar. Mr. Speaker, let me continue. I have withdrawn it, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
I have withdrawn it.
Mr. Speaker,
Honorable member for Castries South.
Mr. Speaker, I take, Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
Mr.
Because we need to
Speaker.
close this.
yes, on a point of order, I think that the honorable member was referring to me. In his last statement there, you heard what he said? If he had to describe me, these are not the kind words as liar that he would use. That he would use words that are much worse than that if I have to understand what he was saying.
Honorable member for Castries South East, we need to move on from that point. I have so ruled, and the member has so stood up, and he has indicated that he is withdrawing any reference to the word liar, whether it's associated with you or any other member in this House, if it so exists within his presentation. Very well. Continue, honorable member.
Mr. Speaker, the member tried his best to get me thrown out of this chamber, but I would not be thrown out this afternoon. I will apologize if I have to apologize. But I'm coming back to you, honorable member from Castries South East. Through you, Mr. Speaker. The honorable member said on Rick Wayne's program that the Prime Minister was able to negotiate an additional $50 million US. That takes the total borrowing from the Taiwanese government to $200 million US, over $500 million. And the honorable member from Castries South East said that the monies, the extra $50 million US, would be used for the police headquarters and for roadworks. For roadworks, Mr. Speaker. And it all ties in with the borrowing, Mr. Speaker. $32 million for capital expenditure and $50 million US for roadworks when monies are going into a lockbox. The fuel tax, we stood up in this House, Mr. Speaker. Yeah.
Honorable member, continue, please.
We stood up in this honorable House and we were told that the tax was being put on fuel, it would be going into a lockbox for road repairs. So, Mr. Speaker, are we not supposed to be scared when for this year alone, we're hearing the potential of almost 750 million EC dollars? The 150 plus another 50 and a potential 75 million US. 275 million US dollars. That's not accounted for in the estimates. That's 745 million EC dollars. Should we not be scared, Mr. Speaker, that this is a level of borrowing that's taking place in this country? You got me once, you're getting me twice.
The honorable member, that's the problem. You keep listening to the member for
Mr.
Grosley.
Speaker, you're supposed to protect me. Mr. Speaker, the member from Denry South keeps pulling my pulse and
Honorable member Castries South,
Mr. Speaker.
speak to the resolution, ignore the other
So
members.
we're talking about borrowing, Mr. Speaker. And the member for Vieux-Fort South and the member for Castries East spoke about borrowing from local banks. And the member for Castries South East interpreted it to mean that things were so good in this country and there is so much growth, Mr. Speaker, that we can borrow money from the banks. Mr. Speaker, the reason why the banks are so liquid is because people are not borrowing money for investment purposes. The banks are not lending because people are not looking for money for investment purposes. Monies are being borrowed for consumerables.
Exactly. That's the key.
For consumerables, when that happens, Mr. Speaker, that's a statement of confidence, of lack of confidence.
Lack of confidence.
That there is, it was a social economic review, we debated it here during the budget, Mr. Speaker. The social economic review said it. So the banks are liquid because there's not enough money being borrowed for houses, for factories, for small hotels, for small guest houses in this country. So there's a lot of money, and it is why a bank can lend money at 4.5%.
Charging extortionate fees.
That's why, Mr. Speaker. So when one is talking about high liquidity in the banks, and the banks themselves are complaining that most of their lending is for consumerables, the government has to go in there. And the honorable member is right. What would the banks do with the money? How would they operate at a profit if they do not lend? They have to find sources of lending. They have to, because that's how they generate their profits, Mr. Speaker. But we should all pay caution to what happened in the US when banks themselves were so liquid and they found all sorts of activities to finance because they need to do it. Mr. Speaker, growth is a phenomenon that we will debate later on, Mr. Speaker. Because you can fuel growth, Mr. Speaker, by high borrowing by any government. It's called Keynesian economics. You can borrow to fuel growth.
And you always collapse after. Always.
Mr. Speaker, you can borrow money to finance growth.
Don't worry.
So when you borrow 275 million US, 750 million EC dollars, there must be growth. This country should be enjoying over 5% growth in the next 2 years annually. Because when you're going to spend $750 million in this country over 15 to 24 months, you must have massive growth. You are borrowing to fuel growth.
And we can pay back.
But what happens after?
We paying back.
But let's not go there, Mr. Speaker. This resolution is about borrowing another $32 million. Government must borrow. But in the broader context of this government's borrowing, it is frightening, Mr. Speaker. So we recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the government has to borrow. I'm not chastising the government for borrowing. But we have serious issues, Mr. Speaker, with the quantum of borrowing that's going to take place in this country. And it's not accounted for yet. Almost 750 million EC from the calculations and the statements made by the honorable member on Rickwin. This is what is frightening, Mr. Speaker. So as we debate the resolution, Mr. Speaker, we recognize that the government has to borrow. But this government is not saying a lot to this country about all the borrowing that's taking place. And sooner or later, Mr. Speaker, we'll have to face the reality of the exorbitant borrowing that's taking place in this country. Thank you very much.